It is October 31, 2007. We're here on the campus of Rutgers University in New Brunswick at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. My name is Don Linky. This is another in the series of interviews for the Brendan T. Byrne Archive of the Rutgers program on the governor. This afternoon we're going to talk to Edward Meara, who has had a varied career as a journalist, as the head of a nonprofit business association, and as a lobbyist, and as a veteran observer and trusted, I think, analyst of New Jersey government and politics. He's going to discuss his relationship with Governor Byrne as well as other governors of New Jersey over the years that he has tracked State House affairs. Ed, why don't we start with the first time you met Brendan Byrne?
Well, it goes back when I was a little punk reporter at the State House. I think I was around 25, 26, and it was under the tenure of Governor Minor. And I had become friendly with Governor Minor because through the silly thing called tennis. He called me into his office one day and said that he had heard that I was a fairly good player and that I had once taught tennis in the city, and would I mind teaching him. So I thought, well, that would be a pretty good entree for a reporter, and I got permission from my publisher, and he said, you can do whatever Bob Minor wants to do, you go with him. So that started really 8 years of playing a lot of tennis with him, and periodically we would need a fourth for tennis. And I don't know exactly the time it was or how long into his term, but there was a young man named Brendan Byrne who was third counsel in his office, and periodically he'd say, well, let's let that young Byrne play with us. So that's how I first met Brendan, and that started a long friendship.
Well, let's backtrack to your upbringing, your family. What brought you to this point where you're playing tennis with New Jersey governors?
Well, I had, you know, as a young guy, everybody was poor in the 40s, and they had, I was in charge of the city tennis program in Trenton at the age of 16. I was 4F because I had a bad knee, but I still could play tennis, that used to get me in trouble with the draft board, incidentally, but I took 6 physicals. Every time my name was in the paper for tennis, the woman who was in charge said, if you could play tennis, you could be, and I said, I'm not trying to duck, miss. I had six times I went over and failed. But anyhow, I ran that program, and then after that, and after college, I went here, Rutgers, and...
what did your parents do?
My dad was a newspaperman. He wound up as chief editorial writer of the Trenton Times. He was a graduate of Princeton, class of 22, which was a famous class, which I think I told you ultimately that Bob Minor became an honorary member of that class because his wife, Helen, was related to a guy named Adlai Stevenson, who was also a member of that class. And so anyhow...
Did your dad know Adlai Stevenson?
He did not. He knew Bill Stevenson, who was her father, and in fact, he was his captain in the Army essay training program at Princeton at the time. And he always said to me that Adlai was not a patch on Bill Stevenson. He said he thought more highly of Bill than he did Adlai. He did not know Adlai. In college, he got to know him afterward, only, you know, through his reputation. But he said that Bill Stevenson was quite a guy.
How early did your family get to Trenton?
Oh, they came over. I guess my grandparents came over from Ireland in the 1800s, and we lived in Trenton all our lives.
As a result of the problems in Ireland, or was it just more voluntary?
I honestly never knew as a child, you know, although my mother was a real Irishman, and she didn't like the English because she used to say that they starved our people.
Did you ever find out how they got down to Trenton?
No, I really don't know how they got to Trenton, to tell you the truth. but they were there and made quite an impact. They were never one of the aristocracy, but they became pretty well known in town. My grandfather was head of the car shops at that time. He was head of the security in the car shops in town where the trains came in. And I managed to go down there as a child, and that was a big thing to see the trains come in, and he was the boss.
I assume it was fairly unusual for your father in those days to be going to Princeton University. How did that come about?
Well, actually, apparently in those days it was very inexpensive. I mean, like, I asked him that in later life because he obviously did not have much money. He said you could really almost walk in for a few $100s a year. But even then, that was a lot of money.
Was he the first in your family to go to college?
I guess he was. Well, he had a brother. No, actually his brother, Dan, went to St. Joseph's in Philadelphia.
Growing up, did you decide fairly early on to follow your father's footsteps in journalism?
He never. He sort of discouraged me in a way from going into the, because as you may know, the newspaper business is not the best paying. People don't realize, even to this day, that newspaper, I think, are terribly underpaid. I'm not a unionist, but I think that the newspaper should have a stronger union. They really are not paid that well. But anyhow, it was just by accident. Actually, I was out of work, and this friend of mine from the Trentonian, who was city editor, he said, I had done some freelance writing for the Trenton Times, and he said, I hear you. I said, yeah. And he said, well, would you like a job? So I went there, and it was a small paper, and you did everything. You started writing obits, and I was only there a few months when I was sent to the courthouse. And then it was a strange thing. There was this guy at the State House who had been there for years, a fellow by the name of Dan McConnell, and he was loved by, he was a defender of the state employee by his columns. Everybody loved Dan McConnell. But anyhow, he had an argument with the publisher, Mr. Goodrich, and he was fired, very surprisingly. And the word got back to the paper that whoever they send down is going to be crucified by the vaunted New Jersey Correspondents Club, which is a tight club at the State House. So they offered the job to everybody. And I was at the courthouse, and my city editor called me, a guy named Bill Blitman, who was a tough, good newspaper man. He said, kid, we're going to make you famous. I said, Bill, I don't want the job. And he said, we're going to double your salary, which at that time was $45 a week. So anyhow, all of a sudden making $90, I thought, well, that's pretty good back in those days. So anyhow, I went, and it turned out that I guess you remember, I don't know, Joe Gribbins from the State House, great old guy. I called him, and I went to a public phone. I was scared to death. I said, Joe, they're sending me down to the State House. I said, the word is that the correspondent, all the boys in the club are going to crucify me. He said, Ed, that's nonsense. He said, we're sorry for Dan, but it's none of our business, and come on down. And I must say, all those men, all of whom were much older than I was then, I think, 24. I wasn't much of a threat to them, I guess, but they all were really nice to me and helped me, and it was really turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, because that's how, I got to know Bob Miner, and ultimately that's how I got to know Brendan, and that's how I got to know Tom Kane, and all, Ray Bateman, and I could go on and on. A lot of...
Describe the major papers in New Jersey at that time when you started.
Well, the big paper was the Newark News. I mean, the Star Ledger then was considered a scandal sheet. And we had there was a guy named Jake Martin, Clark Martin's father, who was the guy at the State House. And he was another one of the men who really helped me tremendously. And I never realized it, but he used to come and watch me play tennis at the city courts. And I never even knew him. And one time we were at a party, and I said, I really don't know much, and you guys have to help me. He says, I'll help you. He says, I was one of your fans. I used to come down and watch you play tennis. So he was a tremendous help to me, and as really all the guys were, Boley Schwartz and, you know, all the old Tigers down there. And it just turned out to be really I had more fun. I mean, we really, we formed the TGIF club every Friday in the newsroom. We'd have martinis till drive us crazy. Ultimately, it was the meeting place for all the secretaries. Thorne Lord, former Mercer County chairman, used to come in. And I remember one time it was St. Patrick's Day, and the place was really jumping. And this was out like around 4 o'clock. We usually didn't start till 5. And the state trooper called me, and you know they were all friendly to us. And he said, "You're making too much noise down there." And I said, "Well, the Attorney General's here. Do you want to talk to him?" Grover Richmond was there.
Drinking?
Grover had a drink or two. But it was, you know, just a crazy life, and but it was fun.
How many papers at that time maintained State House offices?
Oh, there were quite a few. I mean, you know, the AP, UP, Passaic, Asbury Park Press, Easton Express, Star Ledger, New York Times, Tribune, the Herald Tribune. So there was quite a few.
Well, you mentioned how you first got to meet Governor Minor through tennis. What was he like as you got to know him better?
Well, I got to like him very much. Well, like I saw when you play tennis, you relax. So he was very relaxed. He used to say to me, he felt like after he had played 2 or 3 sets of tennis, it was like getting 8 hours sleep. I can remember one of his campaigns. He was under stress, and he called me from Bergen County. He said, "Can you meet me at Morven at 5?" You know, and I had complete carte blanche from my publisher. Whenever the governor called me, I jumped. So, well, we met him, and he said, you know, it's just the greatest relaxation for me. And, you know, he was just another guy. I mean, he wasn't governor when our relationship, he was just another guy. And we used to talk. We used to go out have dinner together. We even double dated a couple times, I think I told you. He took Margaret Truman out a few times. And one time I double dated with them at a local steakhouse, Lorenzo's in town. He really became a friend, and it was all, we, you know, hardly ever discussed politics. You know, I never got into the political thing. But I would be with him a lot of times, especially down at the shore, and he'd have cabinet meetings there, and I'd be off in the corner, and I'd hear things I wasn't supposed to hear. I used to get more scoops, and it got, some of the guys really got a little annoyed about it because I had an entree that was, but unfortunately, a lot of times too, he would tell me, "Hey, you heard that, but you didn't hear it," and I'd have to obviously honor it. But I did get a lot of stories in the shower.
Well, I want to pursue that topic a little bit more, but first, what was Margaret Truman like as a dinner companion?
Well, she was very pleasant. I mean, you know, a very nice, very down-to-earth person. Would be my impression of her too. And you know, she didn't flaunt her position. She was just another nice lady. And you know, of course, she was talking politics a bit and stuff like that. And obviously, she adored her father, and used to talk a lot about him.
Did she speak of the days in the White House?
Never really got into that. No, it was really pretty much cocktail banter. It was never anything terribly serious. And that was only one time that I was with him, you know. And I don't know how many times he did date her, but I don't know.
Let's go delve a bit further into the relationship with Governor Minor. You said that there was some jealousy of the other, among the other press corps, given that you had developed this position where you'd get inside information.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel constrained in what you wrote, or were you not writing really about politics at this point?
Well, I didn't feel, no, if I got a good tip and I could use it, I used it. I didn't feel constrained at all.
What about if it was something negative?
I would have written negative. I can't remember if I did, but I would have. I mean, I wouldn't have let my friendship interfere with my editorial conscience, and no, I would definitely not. In fact, I think the first time I met him, I had written a critical column about him, and that's when he called me into the office, and I was fully prepared to be reprimanded and it was the first time I had been with him face to face. And at that time, a 24-year-old kid to be in the governor's inner sanctum, you know, it was like being with the Pope or whatever. But he, instead of reprimanding me, he said he had heard that I had taught tennis in the city and he would like to learn. He had learned a little bit in high school, but never much. And so that began our association. But no, if there was negative stuff, I certainly, I can't remember an exact story, but believe me, if there was, I would have done it.
Do you recall what your column was about, criticizing him?
I really don't. I think, you know, it was a silly thing. I think it was something about the cars, the special car he got, and that he got it at a special price. I mean, they used to then Cadillacs, and actually it was the state trooper, who was a buddy of mine, told me that he got it at a lesser amount or something, and I think I wrote that, and that apparently annoyed the governor. But he never, you know, he never really gave me a lot of hell for it.
As the years pass in his administration, did you go to other social functions with Governor Minor?
Well, we went to a lot of tennis clubs. I mean, we went to the River Club in New York. We used to go to New York. We'd go to 21. You know, here I am, a young reporter going to 21. We'd go at the shore. We'd play tennis at the Spring Lake Bath and Tennis Club, and we'd play at the Bayhead Yacht Club with one of his old friends, was General Ed Rose, who used to be, he was his chief of staff of defense, and he was quite the guy. And Minor really liked him. He really, I think this is when Bob started to enjoy the good life. I think when he first came aboard from the hills of Phillipsburg, he wasn't quite sure about the Ivy League or anything like that, but he got to, I think he got to like it in later life.
Any other interesting double dates you were involved with?
Never. No. Well, most of the time we were bachelors. Of course, then he met Helen, and I never went out with them, although, you know, I went to certain functions I'd be at there, and Helen and I became good friends because she also played tennis.
Now, going back to your relationship with Brendan Byrne, was it simply as he became the fourth in a doubles?
Yeah, you know, we really, I didn't see a lot of him, you know, it was, you know, we became friendly but not good friends at that time because, you know, I didn't see a lot of him. And then he went on to be prosecutor and then become a judge. The one time I did see him, he was sitting outside the judiciary. I hadn't seen him for years, and he was sitting at the judiciary offices, and I went over and said, "How you doing?" We're talking. I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I was nominated for a judge and not going to interview me now, and I'm nervous about it." And so I told him, I said, "Don't worry, you'll be all right." And of course he did become, and then I lost track of him again until he ran for governor.
Were you a reporter throughout the Minor terms?
Yes.
Now, when he is leaving office in the early 60s, what were the sort of politics of the time in both parties?
Well, it was funny. Minor, of course, had offended a lot of Democrats. He had been on the front of Time magazine as a possible vice presidential candidate, and believe me, he wanted to be vice president, of course, and I certainly couldn't blame him. And the Johnson people, Lyndon Johnson people, had gotten a commitment from him to hold back on the nominating committee, and as you know, you probably remember, I've been told, that when the floor was open, everybody was urging him to go for Kennedy, but he held firm, and that's one thing. When he gave his word was good, but that made him very unpopular with a lot of Democrats. I can tell you that, including John Kennedy.
Did you ever speak to Governor Minor after that about that decision?
No, our relationship was such that I very seldom got into discussing politics. It was more of two guys playing tennis, and we talk about the simple things, sports and what movie did you see, but we very seldom got into any deep political, and I don't think he wanted to. I think he was careful, as I say, about not giving me too much inside information, which I respected him for, And
it may be speculation, but do you think his decision was at least partially related to Helen Stevenson Minor and the relationship they had developed?
You mean as to why he held out? I don't think so. My guess was he held out because he felt it would give him a shot at the vice presidency.
So more for his political interest than
that was my guess.
Family.
Yeah, that was my guess, and I could be wrong, but that was my interpretation, for whatever it was worth.
What do you remember about that next gubernatorial election?
I don't remember a lot. Refresh my memory. Now I forget who we ran.
Well, Governor Hughes and.
Oh, well, yeah, Dick Hughes. Well, another close friend, Trenton Boy, and another person I had known all my life. And I didn't think none of us at the State House thought he had a chance against
Jim Mitchell.
Jim Mitchell.
Who was the Labor Secretary in the Nixon
administration. And he, as you again remember, fell down at Spring Lake in the bathroom. Supposedly had a few drinks, and broke his leg and couldn't campaign. And Dick went all over, he had a great personality and went throughout the state. And I'll never forget, the week before the election, it was really getting close, and they enticed Kennedy to come down and speak for him. And I was at the state, I was wandering around the Memorial Building, and I saw a trooper, and I said, and he had a white button on. I said, "What's that white button?" He says, "That's White House staff." He said, "You can go anywhere with that." I said, "Well, give me one." So he gave me a white button. And Kennedy and Frank Thompson, who was a distant relative, is my wife's first cousin, and he was then chairman and a friend of Kennedy's, was in the back room of the War Memorial with Kennedy and his wife and a few other people. And I walk in. Of course, Toppy didn't say anything. And I got talking to Jacqueline Kennedy. She was just standing there. So I talked to her for about 10 or 15 minutes. Simple things, isn't politics boring? And no, that voice. So then he walked out, the president, and I walked out behind him, about down the corridor, out to the front where they had the dais set up in front of the War Memorial, and there was a big throng. And I was about, I'd say 15 or 20 paces behind him, and I could see him silhouetted against the sky as he go down, and he was plaiting his hair, had a big head of hair, and the crowd roared, and you could feel, it was like they were cheering for me. You could feel the strength of that crowd really within your stomach, and I could just imagine, this is a thing that feeds political people, I guess, because and it was great, and then Dick came through. That was great for us, because we all, you know, was another local boy, although he was born in, I think it was Burlington, but most of his life was spent in Trenton.
Did you know other members of the Hughes family?
Yeah, oh sure, we knew Betty very well, and we went to the same church, Betty Sullivan. And
what was she like?
Oh, she was quite a person. She, a tremendous extrovert, very friendly, and if you remember, had a TV show which was
Philadelphia,
which was very popular, and she was popular. She was a wonderful person. I mean, you know, extremely outgoing, extremely friendly, and the two of them were a great match. I mean, you know, his first wife had died, and her husband was killed in the war, and yeah, I knew most of the children.
Of course, they had a large family,
yeah,
with
well,
the two families put
yeah,
together.
You know, I think it was 10. But I knew, well, I guess I knew still most of them. I see Brian, as you know, is Mercer County executive, and I see a lot of
Mike Murphy.
Michael Murphy, and all of them, John, who's a federal judge, and so they're good people.
What do you remember of sort of days at Morven, either official functions or unofficial parties?
Well, you know, I was there more when I never got into the you know, the fundraising places or anything. I was there. It was just me, and I very seldom went to I can't even remember if I did. If it was actually something that I had to cover. I mean, I never was invited as a guest. I was there. I don't know. As I say, I had a strange Joe Katz, is a good friend of mine, and who, you know, we worked together at the State House. He used to call me his tennis courtesan. But that was my function. I mean, I really, it was a strange function, but I can tell you I had a lot of fun.
Contrast Governor Minor and Governor Hughes in their style as governors and politicians.
I would say they're totally different. Minor was more introspective, more, I would say, stubborn. He was, I thought he was Swiss, and I don't want to get the Swiss mad at me, but in fact, I shouldn't say this, but my mother, he was stubborn, no question about it, Bob Minor. But he was a great guy, and I think a good governor. But my mother, who only knew him casually, used to call him Ironhead because he was stubborn, and she really didn't know him very well. She only knew him through me, I guess. But
and that stubbornness also reflected his dealings with the legislature and the press.
Yeah, oh yeah. But on the other hand, Dick Hughes was very, you know, as I say, outgoing, very friendly, and very warm. And, you know, a lot of people, he's still one of the most popular governors, obviously. It's hard to say who will come out on top in history, but he certainly will come out as certainly one of the favored, next to Brandon.
Talk about some of the issues during the Hughes administration.
Well, you know, I can't think of a lot of them, because, see, then I was out. I was no longer a reporter. I was now into the business community had come to me because there was a redevelopment program underway, and Kandub and Fleissig had done a survey of the city, and
they were an architectural and engineering firm.
Development, yeah, and they had done a proposal to rejuvenate and rebuild Trenton, which was starting then to sink, and you know, putting in a big shopping center and doing a lot of things to battle the suburbs. And they needed somebody to sell the program, so they came to me, and they knew, I guess they knew of my contacted the State House, and for whatever reason, they hired me. And we battled, but one thing did. Bob Miner wanted to disperse all of the state buildings to the suburbs because he had the idea if the bomb hit, you know, all the buildings would be destroyed. And I used to argue. I said, I am not an atomic scientist, Governor, but if a bomb hits State and Broad, it sure as hell going to also encompass the suburbs. So he was again stubborn, and I lobbied him and lobbied him and lobbied him. And I remember Ray Mail, who was, I think, his labor secretary. He was speaking to the business group. At that time, it was called the Greater Trenton Council. And it was the annual meeting, and Bob was the featured speaker. And it was at that dinner he announced that he had changed his mind, and he was locating all the state buildings within the city of Trenton. And Ray Mail said, he said, I can't believe what I'm hearing. But, and that, I mean, to this day, it's been somewhat the salvation of the city of Trenton, because without the state buildings, we'd be another Camden. I mean, Trenton obviously has its severe problems, but that was a great, at that time, I was a hero in my group. I don't know if I could take total credit for it, but I used to really bang him on it.
From a career perspective, what was your next step after the Trenton project? Well,
then they merged with the Chamber of Commerce, which became a county chamber, and then I became. First, I really did, I was tired of it. I wanted to get into my own. I started an advertising business and a lobbying business, and I wanted to just get out on my own totally. But then the executive, they had some problems with the executive, and I was doing governmental consultant for the chamber just as a retainer. And then the person left all of a sudden, and they were stuck. And they came to me and said, would you take over as president? So I said, okay, but I still wanted to have the right to have my own business. And they allowed me to do that. So in a sense, I was doing two things. So that worked out pretty well for me, and I did that for 20 years. And I just retired, well, no, actually I retired 10 years ago, and totally went into lobbying. And then I retired from that, I guess, about 3 years ago, because my wife was ill, and but that ended my career in the lobbying world, although I still have a desk at Martin and Bontempo.
Let's go back to the chamber role. What were some of the other issues or development ideas that you dealt with during your time at the chamber?
You know, it was, we were trying to get programs to deepen the Delaware. There was always hope that we could have a deep water port at Trenton, which apparently at one time way back they did, but the channel had silted in, and it was only I don't know, 10 or 12 feet deep. So we went on a long harangue about, you know, dredging the channel and going to the government, and I was doing a lot of that, but we met with no success there. Another program was to build a dam in the upper Delaware. I forget now the name of the program.
Tox Island.
Tox Island. And we worked very hard for that, but of course the environmentalists were against us. They said that it was going to create a big lake up there and chase all the flora and fauna out. And it's a shame, because I think it still is the right thing. It would have saved a lot of these floods, which are now happening in around our region and up and down the Delaware. I still think it was the right thing, but that was a big project, and we lost. So I can't say that I won all the time, you know.
Of course, that was a decision in the Byrne administration.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to the Hughes years. Some of the Hughes proposals were for broad-based taxes for the first time in New Jersey history, both sales and income, I believe.
Yeah.
sales did go through.
Mhm.
I assume from the Chamber's constituency you were opposing those tax increases, yes or no?
Yeah, we were not too happy about it. In fact, you know, a lot of our people, of course, obviously a lot of the people within the business group are Republican anyhow. So they weren't too happy with Dick Hughes anyhow, even though they may liked him personally. They did not like a lot of his policies, and so they were very unhappy about the sales tax program.
How did you feel personally? Did you believe that your members were behind the curve in terms of the state's longer-term interests?
At this date, I can't tell you how I felt, really. I have always been told that the sales tax is an unfair tax because it hits people of the poor as well as the wealthy the same. And I think it's an equitable tax. I mean, I personally am against it, and I still am. But you know, as I say, I'm on the back nine. My days are of trying to make that influence are over.
Well, during the Hughes years, any other recollections, either personally or professionally, in terms of contacts with the governor?
No, you know, I would just, you know, just to show you the difference. He never flaunted. At one time, my wife and I met him just by chance, and Betty, at La Hierre's in Princeton, which is one of our favorite restaurants. And it was a Saturday night, and you couldn't get in. It was really jammed. And he went up, you know, and he said, "I'm Dick Hughes." Well, I said, "I'm sorry, you know." He didn't say, "I'm Governor Hughes," or. And so I went up to the guy and I said, "You know, that's the governor." I said, "Yeah." We got a table, but he never, you know, he was basically a modest man, and she was too. She would be more likely to say, "Well, don't you know?" But Betty was. They were just a great team. And I remember that night we had a great dinner and went back to their house and sat around. Betty liked fireplaces, and she used to light all the fireplaces, and we sat and chatted for about 2 in the morning, just about, you know, silly things, kids, and nothing terribly profound, you know.
The Democratic Convention in 1964 was held in New Jersey in Atlantic City. Any memories of that?
Yeah, I went to that, and it was, again, I'd gotten a ticket. Averill Harriman was then hoping to be the next president, and he had a big function. And Joe McLean, who was then Conservation Commissioner, gave me a ticket to the event, and I went in, and it was interesting. And you know, I was in with all these people who were making all these deals. But I got a quick impression. I was not very impressed with Harriman. I only talked to him maybe for 10 or 15 minutes. And I got the impression there that he wasn't making a great headway. And I remember I went back and wrote a story to that effect, that Harriman had laid a bomb at the governor's convention. But we had a lot of fun, too, down there to get to Atlantic City.
There were reports that Lyndon Johnson tried to get the convention moved out of Atlantic City when he became president after the Kennedy assassination. Did you know anything about that?
I didn't know anything about that, no.
Now, you said that you essentially lost touch with Brendan Byrne during these years. Do you remember any contacts at all? I
really don't. I think, did I tell you the story of my mother telling me that he was running? I told you at lunch, but well, you know, I totally lost. And Dick Coffey, who was our county chairman, was running for governor, and I was on a business committee for Dick. And I went to Florida for a vacation with my wife, and I called my mother. She had been ill, to see how she was doing, and she said, "Guess what's happened? Dick Coffey has bowed out, and your friend Judge Fern is running for governor. And I said, Mother, I do not know a Judge Fern. I think, poor mother, she said, oh, you simpleton. She used to call me a simpleton. You know Judge Brendan Fern. I said, oh, Brendan, yeah. So then I did get, because another one of my great pals in the tennis world, as you know, is Dottie Seltzer, who was the ongoing secretary for all the governors. I mean, she was secretary and a great person. And so I said, gee, Dottie, you know, I'd like to quietly get involved, but I can't. I have to be careful. So then I saw Brendan. You know, we started playing squash. He liked to play squash because it was quick. Brendan was a hard worker. I mean, he had certain times he would like to play, but he was really working, and he would take we'd only take 30 or 40 minutes, because squash you could play fast. We'd play at the local Trenton Club just down from the State House and have a bowl of soup, and he'd be back in his office within an hour. So, you know, Dottie, always, you know, I'd see a lot of Dottie then. And I decided to have a fundraiser for Brendan, which was a gutsy thing to do, because a lot of my Republican friends didn't like that, because they didn't like him either, because, you know, they didn't like Democrats. So I said, I don't care.
You also had a Republican incumbent governor.
Exactly, right. So I said, you know, I really, I'm going to do it, because I was pretty confident he was going to win too. And
even when Governor Cahill was still the presumed candidate for re-election?
Yeah, I just, you know, I talked to a lot of the Democratic leaders, and they said, don't worry, he's going to win. And I took their word. And I had a big fun at my own home. And the senator from Texas who said, do you know John Kennedy, to Senator, you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know, but
I'm getting names are killing me. Oh God, I can't think of his name. He was there at the party, because he had been going around with Brendan. And when I put him in the car, and he said, you're going to be a great governor. I'll think of the guy's name. He was a very classy guy.
He was the vice presidential candidate.
Right, yeah.
With Carter's re-election.
Yeah. You can't think of his name either. No. You're getting senile like me. But he was a really classy man. He sent me a note thanking me, you know, which I was very impressed by. And I'll think of his name. But
now, did you recall any discussion of Brendan Byrne running for governor 4 years earlier, when Governor Cahill was elected?
I don't recall that. No. I met him. Well, he had lost the Senate seat up in Warren, and he was working. We had what they called then the Stamler hearings. Do you remember what the Stamler hearings? And that was about gambling up in Bergen County, and it was a big thing. And that's how also I met him. We used to sit in the back row with, like being in school, and just by chance he sat next to me. And Clendenin Ryan, who you may have heard of, who was a great amateur crime fighter, he was there and had hired Miner to monitor the whole thing. And we started going out to lunch together, the three of us. And I never drank at lunch in those days, but Clendenin always ordered a bottle of very superior wine, and we used to have a lot of fun talking to him about some of his unusual experiences. But yeah, that was really, what I think about, that was probably the first time I did meet Miner.
Now, you said you started supporting Dick Coffey in his
yeah, well, Dick was
race.
another old friend of mine, and
we'll talk about that scenario and why Dick Coffey decided to fold his tents.
Well, you know, I honestly, I guess, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't ask him. I was shocked because I was away when it was announced, and I just only assumed that he felt Brendan would be too strong a candidate. I mean, if he had the support of the entire county group, so except maybe Mercer, so I guess he figured he better get on the bandwagon, and so that. But I never really asked him, so I don't know. But I just can only assume.
Another potential candidate was Ed Crabeel in that year.
Yeah, but never felt that he was,
a viable candidate.
No.
Were you surprised when Governor Cahill lost the nomination?
I was, yeah, because he was another very popular guy, and he was around town, although I didn't know him very well, but he was around. He used to go to lunch at Mary Mark's, which at that time was a big place where all the Governor Dick Hughes used to go there too, and he'd be like just one of the guys. And he was very friendly and very pleasant. And I was very surprised that he didn't get the nomination.
But you still thought, even before the primary, that Brendan Byrne could have beaten Bill Cahill that year?
Yeah, maybe it was my prejudice showing, but I had talked to a lot of Democrats, a lot of the real pros, like, Thorne Lord, who I respected a great deal, in our county chairman, and he always called me correspondent. He said, "Correspondent, the man is the next governor." So I went with I could have made a big mistake, but because I know a lot of my business people were mad at me, but then when he won, of course, I was a hero.
When Congressman Sandman defeated Governor Cahill in that primary election, did you feel, as many others, that the general election really was already decided, that he had...
Well, I heard you speak about that. One thing about Sandman, and the first time I heard him speak with Brendan was at a New Jersey Business and Industry monthly or yearly meeting with the guy. And Sandman could speak. I mean, he was a cocky guy. And Brendan was more introverted at that time. Brendan still, I think, is a shy person. And he gave a really pretty good speech. Brendan gave a speech which wasn't very good. Brendan at that time was really not, he still is not the greatest after-dinner speaker, but at that time he was really not very good. And Sandman at that time, at that event, of course it was a very Republican group, he spoke more, he was more articulate. He came across better because he was, that kind of a guy. And Brendan was just really learning. He hadn't, I guess, made a lot of speeches in his life. I don't know. And it's amazing how Brendan has progressed. Of course, he is one of the greatest one-liners in history, and he's so good at that. And even to this day, he's still not, a great speech maker, but he's certainly much better than he was back when he first started. He certainly has improved a lot.
After Dick Coffey ended his campaign and endorsed Brendan Byrne, some of the Coffey people joined the Byrne campaign, notably Dick Leone and Lou Caden. What contacts had you had with them at this point? Any? Not
really, no. Not really. I just met them, but I had none at all, to be perfectly honest with you.
Did you see any improvement in Brendan Byrne's campaigning as the 1973 campaign progressed?
Oh, he definitely got more into it. I mean, Brendan is a very determined person, and he wanted to win, obviously, and he started to get more relaxed in the thing, because he really hadn't been out there. He was a judge, and he hadn't been in that limelight, and he started to become more accustomed to the limelight, and definitely improved a lot in his presentation and his just going around and meeting people.
Did you renew your personal contacts with him during the campaign?
Very little, because he didn't have time to go out on the tennis court or play squash or anything. So I kept close to him through Dottie Seltzer, who was his loyal secretary and advisor, and you know, as I say, then when he won, you know, he of course he was at my house at the fundraiser we had and things like that, and I can't think of that senator's name. But anyhow,
Benson?
Yeah, Lloyd Benson. Oh, that's right. Classy guy. He really was. He was a classy guy. I'll never forget getting a personal letter from him. He probably does it. I'm sure he does to everybody, but that's.
Well, in any event, Brendan Byrne gets elected fairly easily over Congressman Sandman. Did you participate at all in the transition or suggest initiatives, either personally or through the chamber?
It's a role I never really got involved. My contacts with him were virtually 90% social. I never got in. As I say, he did appoint me as chairman of the New Jersey Building Authority, and that was because I was local. I knew, you know, the local scene. That was my only. I never really wanted anything from him. I never asked him for anything. As I say, we was strictly on a social basis.
Well, he starts off fairly well. He implements the odd-even gas plan, which gets him quite a bit of positive press, both in New Jersey and nationally. But then, fairly quickly, he runs into problems in confronting the state's fiscal situation and endorses income tax when, during the campaign, he had been quoted as saying he saw no reason for an income tax, quote, in the foreseeable future, close quote. From the outside, what were your thoughts as you see his administration struggling a little bit during that first year?
You know, it's obvious that there was a very unpopular juncture in his career, and everybody was saying this is going to mean his rapid demise, and there's no way that he'll possibly get reelected with this hanging over him. And that was a general feeling that followed him right to his bid for reelection. I mean, they thought it was it finished him.
Did your tennis relationship pick up again during that first year?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And did he talk at all about the problems?
No, we very seldom, you know, it was really, as I said, just like with Bob Miner, it was therapy for these men to be out there, and I never used my, whatever, entree or whatever word you want to use. We just, you know, talk like two guys, a tennis player, and we talk about sports and we talk about the theater, but we never really talked substantively about issues.
Who were the most frequent members of your tennis parties?
Well, old General Rose was a great pal of his, and he liked to play with him. Dottie used to play with us a lot, Dottie Seltzer. Bill Dwyer, who was a local columnist. Another one of his great pals who played with us is J.P. Miller, who wrote Days of Wine and Roses and won Tony for Helter Skelter. And he was Brendan liked him, and he, because Brendan, as we were saying, liked celebrities, and J.P. was a celebrity. He was a screenwriter back in the 50s and 60s, and he used to regale us of stories about Lana Turner, Rita Hayworth. J.P. had them all. I mean, you know, they were all his girlfriends.
I assume stories you don't want to repeat for posterity.
No, that they were just friends. But, you know, he would tell us all these things, and Brendan loved it. We would laugh, and Brendan was very fond of him.
Well, as you see his popularity declining, given largely his support of the income tax, did you think there were any things he could have done differently? Or was it simply the policy difference and the unpopularity of taxes in New Jersey?
I just think I didn't have the answer, but I didn't think the income tax from a popularity point of view was the right thing to do. But again, I never really discussed it with him. All I did know is that it could have, and a lot of people thought it was the death knell of his political career. That was a general consensus around the State House at that time, that's for sure.
Now, as he gets closer to the decision to run for re-election, and after a couple of failed tries, getting the income tax and the school funding package through the legislature, what were your own thoughts about whether he should run or not run?
Well, I didn't think he'd had a prayer of running against Ray Bateman, who also was a good friend of mine. And I felt like, and it was certainly, I think, a consensus of a lot of people at the time, that Ray would win. And I'm not sure, but I think on several occasions I told Brendan that he shouldn't run, and he didn't really have a chance. But he ran, and what was it, the famous, he referred to the Bateman plan as the SOB plan?
BS plan.
BS plan, which Dottie Seltzer incidentally thought was terribly crude, but it turned out to be a magical thing, which it turned the election around, I think. He loves to talk about that to this day. He thought that was a great move, and it did. And I was pleasantly, it was, as I say, Ray, who, as I say, we went back a long time. We started the State House together. He was with the Republican State Committee when I went in. We're about the same age. And so I had known him from way back in the 50s. And he said to me, well, which of us can do the most for you? I said, I don't need either of you. But
talk a bit more about Ray and your relationship.
Well, it was funny. Ray and I we just hit it off. Again, he another certainly great guy, and through another racket, he liked to play squash, and we used to play a lot of squash together. We had Art Trenton Club, used to play his Raritan Valley Club, and then we'd go out to dinner with he and his wife and I, and my wife, and we became friendly through that, and just being around the State House. His mentor, Sam Badine, who was then Republican chairman, was a great guy. We used to see him socially, and I used to say, these Republicans aren't bad people. But to this day, Ray and I are good friends, and I'm a good supporter of his son Kip. I'm sure he's very proud that he'll probably be the next senator, I'm sure.
And as that campaign progressed with the Bateman-Byrne respective policies on how to solve New Jersey's fiscal situation, give us your memories of how it led to November. Well,
it's still the general theory and around of the so-called smart guys was that Byrne was saddled with his income tax, and Bateman had this other plan which Brendan had called BS. But he certainly went in election day an underdog, and I know a lot of people were surprised,
including you.
I was surprised, I have to admit it. Yeah. I was very happy for him. I wrote him a personal letter, and I said, you won this. A lot of people are going to be around you saying that they were responsible for your win, but this is a win. This is your own personal win, and take credit for it yourself because it was your victory, which it was, I think.
Have you talked to Ray since that election? And
oh, we used to kid about it, yeah. But not to,
analyze what happened?
No, not really. Again, when you're in that kind of a relationship, you talk about simple things. You know what I mean? It's more on a social basis, and that's how I knew Ray more. Through going out to dinner with him, and our wives were friendly and stuff like that. But I never thought it was smart to talk business when you're having pleasure. And Ray did me some favors when he was in the legislature.
Governor Burns' second term, did you see any difference in either his style or his public persona?
Well, I think he got better. I mean, I think he got more comfortable being with people and speaking. And certainly, his speaking got better, and of course, he started developing these one-liners, which he became the Jackie Mason of politics. And I think he once told me that he stole a lot of that timing of Jackie Mason. And if you know, I'm no expert, I'm terrible at telling jokes, but Brendan had the timing that a Jackie Mason had. And I think he used to use Jackie Mason's tape to get that timing, which he had down, and he still has it to this day. You know, it's amazing how he can do that and just give, you might say, an average speech. But as a one-liner, he just got tremendous, and it helped him a lot. I mean, it really did. It showed him to be the warm person that he basically is, you know.
Now, you mentioned that Governor Minor had a reputation for being stubborn. Governor Burns, to some extent, also was seen as stubborn in legislative dealings and on some issues like the Pinelands. Do you think that was a fair assessment? He's a little stubborn. There's no question about that, I would say. Yeah, he's, you know, thick Irish, as I'm Irish, so I can say that. But he could be stubborn. Did you see his style as less compromising than Governor Hughes, for example?
Well, as a snap comment, I would say that Dick Hughes was more of a compromiser than Brendan. I would say that.
Now, you mentioned that Governor Burns was interested in celebrities. Any celebrities that you played with in tennis or saw at some?
Well, yeah, I know he had one. I missed it one time. He had Luciano Pavarotti, but I'm a big fan.
I assume not to play tennis.
Luciano played.
He did.
That's why I was not there, but Brendan told me that, and I was really angry because I'm a great fan of Pavarotti. I think, you know, I happen to like opera, and I think Pavarotti's got one of the great voices of all time, and sorry to see him pass. But he
probably not the greatest backhand.
No, but he apparently liked tennis. One time I was up there, and Andy
Williams.
Andy Williams came in, and he had one of the best-looking one of his girlfriends. I can tell you, I can still remember that little girl sitting watching us play. She was about 19 years old, and she was a very pretty girl. But he liked celebrities, as I told you. One of the reasons he was fond of J.P. Miller, because J.P. was somewhat of a celebrity, and he could regale him with these alleged celebrities he had met in Hollywood when he was a screenwriter. But no, he liked Sinatra. He enjoyed that. Any
other personal interests or quirks that you remember?
Of Brendan? Mm-hmm. No, not really. He was he was basically a simple man. I mean, a nice man. I mean, he had simple tastes. He loved sports. He loved to exercise. He was trying to, like everybody, try to stay in shape, which he did to this day. And no, I just think obviously I'm prejudiced because I think he's one of the best governors we had. I mean, he stood up on that Pineland issue, and he brought gambling in, which he wasn't totally happy about because he was he's very proud of his image of being no chicanery, and I think they put controls on through him that hopefully we've not had any scandals down there. So no, I've had a lot of fun with him. I was pleased to know him, and pleased to know Bob Minor and Dick Hughes and a lot of the old State House gang, going back to the 50s, like Eddie Patton. I mean, you could name.
Well, let's talk about a few of those that remember the best. Why don't you start with Eddie Patton, and we'll talk about a few of those other personalities.
Well, Eddie was, I'll never forget the day Bob Miner fired Harold Huffman on the, the scandal there.
Former governor.
Yeah, and the DMV commissioner. Eddie came out, he said, "Kid, I've got tomorrow's story in my pocket." And I said, he wouldn't tell me, So we went in, and of course then Miner announced. But Eddie was just, Eddie liked to have a good time. And he was usually a big participator in our TGIF parties. I know another guy who was terrific is Thorne Lord. I mean, he created the Mercer County powerhouse that it still is, really, I guess. He emphasized voter registration. That was his big thing. If you wanted a job, or if you wanted to run for public office, regardless of your credentials, you had to be out on those summer nights registering voters, and if you missed, he would let you know about it. And one of my summer jobs, just as a kid, he came to me through Tompe, who, as they say, we're related, and asked me to get a group of guys together to go throughout the city and Chambersburg and that area and register voters, and we did. We registered, we went door to door, and we did such a good job. Thorne really, he asked me to run for office. He asked me to get more involved, but I never really wanted to.
What about, talk more about Frank Thompson, who you've talked briefly about before.
Well, he's a member of our family. He's, I think, he was great for Trenton. He brought more federal funds into Trenton than anybody before or after him. And he was a very close friend of my father's. They were in the Navy together. And he was at our house. He lived around the corner from us, and he was in our house 2 or 3 times a week, because, I don't know, he was part of the family. I mean, he was family. And I think it was just horrible what happened to him. I think, I was told by him, who knows if it was true, that Jimmy Carter set that up because there were reports, and it was true, that Tompe and Pete Williams were going to support Ted Kennedy for president against Carter in the primary. Because I used to say, why would a Democrat set another Democrat up? Which is what he did. I mean, Carter was in office. I mean, Carter must have known about it, and Tompe did have a failing. I mean, and it was known that he drank too much. And if you look at those tapes, they were pouring whiskey in him, and if Tompe, after he had a certain amount of drinks, he'd promise anything. And to this day, I say he didn't get the money, but I think it was tragic, because he was certainly it was entrapment, no question about it.
Because we're discussing the app scandal.
Yeah, it was absolutely entrapment, and for another Democrat to do that to a Democrat, it made sense, I guess. I don't know. I mean, he told me that's what, in his opinion, that's why Carter. And he made a big mistake. There's no question about it. But he was a good congressman.
What contacts did you have with him after he was convicted?
Oh, quite. Oh, and he was still in the family. We used to see the family events, and it was hard. He told me he was in this prison. I guess it was in Kentucky or something, and he had a heart condition, and he was walking down the hall, and he said to the guard, he says, I'm feeling a little dizzy. He says, well, walk against the wall, you won't have to fall too far. I mean, and this is pretty rough for a guy who was very close to Jack Kennedy. I mean, Kennedy called him Topper, and they were good friends. They went in Congress together and socialized together. and you know, he was friendly with Bobby. I mean, he was very close to the Kennedys, and here he's down in a Kentucky prison with some crazy guard telling him to walk against the wall so he won't fall down. So it had to be rough, and you know, obviously it took a lot out of him, but you know, he survived, and it was a rough time. I remember, I'll never forget when I came home. It was one night, my father was living with us, and he said, "Tom P's in trouble." I said, "What?" It was on the 11 o'clock news. I said, I said, my father, I said, I think he's getting senile. Tom P couldn't be in trouble. Because at that time, he was riding high, you know. I went one time, he was chairman of the committee. I'm not sure what the name of it is, but if you needed a new chair or a new pen, whatever you needed in your office, you had to go through his committee. I forget the name of the committee. And we were visiting one time, and these guards were genuflecting, and everybody was... I said, well, he said, well, you see that guy? He said, I just got him his sergeant's stripe. The guards were under his domain too, you know. But he was chairman of an important committee, and he was a big guy, and head of the personal friend of the Kennedys. I mean, he was, you know, he had it all.
What are your memories of Joe Merlino?
Joe, again, was a local boy who was very aggressive. But he made a lot of mistakes as Senate President. I mean, he was arrogant. I mean, he was absolutely arrogant, and that's the only word I can use. I mean, he's a friend of mine to a degree. I mean, I knew him all my life. But he made a lot of enemies in that chair, just by his demeanor. It was terrible, and it cost him. You know, when he left office, most of the time, if you're a lawyer and you're a Senate President, you can do a lot of favors for people legitimately. And when you leave office, your law office can. But his went down. I don't know. He died, I think, almost broke. But he didn't handle. He really thought he was going to be governor, but it's a shame. I mean, because he was a bright guy, no question about it. But his arrogance killed him. Absolutely.
How about Howard Woodson?
Well, Howard was a great guy. I mean, he was an evangelist. He could speak. He was a great speaker, and he handled his power very well. I mean, he was a good man, and I liked him, and he was just the opposite of Joe. I mean, he was very gracious. If he could help you, he would, and you know, that church boy, he was the man. He was the man.
When did you first meet Tom Kane, Sr.?
Well, I knew him when he was, you know, in the assembly, and not real well. And again, I met him through tennis. We had this group. There was this guy, Ray Walsh, who was executive vice president of the New York Giants, and Vic D'Argerzio. They were roommates at Wellington Meara at Fordham, and they loved tennis. They were #1 and #2 on the Fordham tennis team back in the 30s. So I didn't make a long story short. They created this tennis. Once a year we would meet at their place up in the Westchester, or at the opening of the Giant training camp, wherever it would be, Westchester or wherever. 16 guys, and one of the 16 was Tom. And we play round robins, and we used to have great press. You know, the airlines who chartered, the winner would get a trip to Paris or whatever. You know, they had great prizes, and I won it quite a lot of times. And Brenda used to call it the Eddie Meara's Vacation Club. But that's where I met Tom. I mean, that's how I got to know him pretty well. And then, you know, we played a lot with Brendan and he and other people when he was at Drumswacket. And he's still, he's certainly another one of my favorite governors. And he certainly, he's come out very well. As he said, I don't get too many calls from the White House anymore, but he he called it as he sees it, and that's why he was a good governor. He must have been difficult for him to go against Bush as he did, but he was right, in my opinion.
What's your quick assessment of the other governors we've had since Tom came?
Well, see, I've never met Mr. Corzine or Governor Corzine. I've never met him. And after Tom, I was I'm really out of it. You know, I just was out of it. I'm not involved or wasn't involved as I was, and I'm what they call the over the hill gang.
Did you know Jim McGreevey in his early years?
No, well, I had met him, but you know, that was really a shock to me, the whole situation with him, because you know, in talking to him, he was a very charming person to talk to, and it was obviously a shock to me, as it was to, I'm sure, a lot of people.
How about Christy Whitman? Did you know her or her family?
I knew her casually. You know, through Ray Bateman and Roger Bodman, who's another one of my buddies. Roger was very close, of course, to her. And but I didn't know her well. Well, I think she made some mistakes, and I think I guess it's not her fault, but that statement she made at the Trade Center with the smoke going around. Remember that they caught her on tape saying that, I don't know what made her say that, but I think she said that the people in charge of the authorities, but I don't think you had to be a rocket scientist to know that smoke had to be damaging. And I hope she doesn't get in trouble for it. I mean, there have been talk that she's going to be sued, and I don't know, but that was a big mistake on her part. It hurt her. It certainly hurt her. I don't know if she ever had a chance, ever wanted to run again, but I'm sure they would flash that, you know.
Going back to your career arc, after you retire from the chamber, you go back to lobbying, which you had dabbled in before. Talk about what a lobbyist does in New Jersey.
Well, you know, it's you play the game, and the game is you have to go to a lot of fundraisers, which are legitimate under the law. I would never, in our company, when with you know, we are very precise about saying if we contribute X, we, you know, with the ELC, we make these reports, and it's a legitimate way to get to pay. It's really a pay for play. I mean, it could be analyzed as being improper, but it's proper. I mean, under the law today, that's what you have to do, and you know, the legislators take advantage of it. You know, you get inundated with my dinner is, and you know, it's an unwritten thing that. If you go to the dinner, but if you don't go to that dinner, you know, it's you're not the most popular guy in town, and but that's the way it's played, and I don't happen to think it's right, but it is. It's under the law today, and that's the way it is. So.
From the various roles you've had, what's your perspective on how government is reported in the media now? Is it getting too aggressive, too confrontational, too personal?
Well, I don't know. I happen to think I think it is more aggressive, and I think it's better. I think that there were times in my career and back in the old days that we sort of winked at certain things that were going on and didn't report them. But there are a lot of things that are going on today that are reported that would have been not have been reported back 30 or 40 years ago. So I think it's better. I mean, I think the press is more aggressive, and I think they're more watchful of our leaders.
How about the evolution in the debate and partisanship in Trenton, which is reflected also nationally? Over your lifetime, you've seen governors who were friends on both sides of the aisles and legislators who might debate on the floor of the Senate or the Assembly, but then would go out and have dinner together and drink together.
Yeah.
Now, it seems to be much more partisan and also somewhat more personal. Has that bother you, or is that part of the system evolving?
Well, I don't know. As I say, I don't see it because I haven't been in the State House in probably a year or two, and I don't get a feel. I happen to think it was better in my day. It didn't make it. You could fight on the floor of the Assembly or the Senate, but then shake hands and go out and have dinner. I think that's a better way to do it. Today, it has gotten more harsh, I think, from what I read. But especially Washington has gotten horrible. It really has. And I think it's a terrible mess down there. And but I'm for the old days.
Well, how about the types of people who run for office today compared to the old days? Have the reforms such as financial disclosure and restrictions on conflicts of interest and the media scrutiny led to a situation where the candidates today may not be as high qualified or as as astute as they were 30, 40 years ago?
It's hard for me to say because I don't know too many of the. As I say, this is the first governor that I haven't known fairly well. I've never met him, and I don't know a lot of the players. I really don't. So it's I honestly can't answer that question intelligently.
One more question?
Yeah.
We got about a minute and 35.
Okay. Ed, any final thoughts or comments on Brendan Byrne or governors in New Jersey or the state as a whole before we close?
Well, in my time, I think that we've been fortunate. I think we've had some really great governors. I think Bob Miner was a good governor. I think Dick Hughes was a great governor. I think Tom Kean was a great governor. I think Brendan Byrne was a great governor. I think I think those men they'll go down as one of the top four. There's my All-American backfield, but they're both all, in my opinion, fine men, and they're fine governors. And obviously, I'm probably prejudiced because I'm closest to Brendan, but Dick Hughes too is a good friend.
Thank you.